We'd like to welcome you all here tonight. We have a special event. Actually, it's very special because we've got the publisher and we've got some authors of the magazine. And I just spent time reading all of the articles, and I must say, I hope that you get a chance and an opportunity, because I think we can all identify with the articles that are written in here. You know, we can see the ways that we're more alike than we are different. One thing, I was talking to Beverly Taylor earlier, and she said, you know, love comes first, but you have to have forgiveness. And so I think this is really an appropriate topic. I'd like to welcome, we've got Max Wise, who is the publisher of the LIV FUN Magazine and Wise Publishing. And let's welcome him.
Thank you. I'm actually Max Wells. I wish I was Wise. But thank you. I'm here tonight as an impresario, someone who weaves together resources and opportunity to put on a show. And what I'd like to do is just take a moment to acknowledge some of the resources, 3 resources. The first resource, you can't? I'm going to acknowledge 3 resources that have helped put on this show tonight. The first resource is Leisure Care, Dan Madsen and his organization, who decided to take a chance with us and liked what we were doing, and helped us publish this magazine. So what is it that we're doing? Well, what we do at Wise Publishing is we recognize that the second half of life can be full of richness, unexpected choices, opportunities for fulfillment and growth, and we create content that supports that growth, which is a great segue to the second resource that I'd like to acknowledge, which is our writers and our editors and our designers. If there's anybody here who's written for us, contributed, please stand up a moment, if you would, please. So I just want to acknowledge these people. They're all accomplished writers. They all have expertise, interesting adventurers, travelers. So please introduce yourselves at the end of the talk. They would love to hear your stories, and I think you would like to hear theirs. The third resource that I want to acknowledge is Kate Harrison and her crew here at the Bellatini for putting this on. Thank you. And the fourth, I said 3, but I lied. The fourth resource is you, the audience, because without you, these other 3 resources would be pretty lonely. I'd like to thank you for turning up, and I'm going to thank you in advance for participating at the end, because I'm sure you will after you hear the stories that these people have to tell you. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand back to Kate, who's going to introduce the writers.
We'll just go down the line here. Carlene is here to my left, and she's actually written, she's a freelance writer, has written a couple of books. I hope you have a chance to read her article. It is so moving. And she lives here in Seattle, and she teaches writing for the University of Washington, the Extension School. So wonderful, powerful story, powerful. Our next one is Sue Peterson, and Sue is actually with our neighbor here. She's at Cornerstone Advisors here in Bellevue, and she's been doing that, I think, for 25 years, have you? And she writes financial articles for the magazine. And again, I so enjoyed your piece as well, because, you know, I see that a lot, the forgiveness in family members. And the next is Sandy, and Sandy is the executive director of ELDERWISE in Seattle, and she also sits on the board of the Northwest Center for Creative Aging, and they do outreach programs in retirement communities, and just really, you know, enriching the lives of seniors, and that's what we're all about here too. So I appreciate that. Tom Orton at the end. And Tom lives in Seattle, and I read his article, and now I can hardly wait to read his book because it was so good. What I'd like to do is start with Carlene first.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I'm going to ask for a little your patience tonight. I lost my son 4 years ago in the Afghan war, and I have not spoken publicly about it since then. And so this might be a little bit difficult, so I will try my hardest to keep my composure. Okay, so usually when I speak, I don't read what I have to speak, but I'm going to stick with that tonight to just read this. Okay. July 13th, 2008 started out like any normal Sunday. I grabbed water from the fridge and started an exercise tape. When I heard a knock at the front door, I peered through the peephole. 2 blurry figures held clipboards to their chests. Solicitors, I thought, and stepped back, waiting for them to leave. I could hear them moving alongside the house. There must be a back door, a deep voice cut through the air. A mother's intuition gripped my heart. I rushed to the bedroom window and pulled back the curtain. Ascending the steps of my porch were 2 erect military officers. Running to the door, I threw it open and pleaded with them. Tell me he isn't dead. It didn't matter if Jason came home without limbs, as long as he was alive. We had gotten through difficult times before. We would get through this. The chaplain's eyes locked with mine, not a flicker of light in them. I wanted to slam the door on the featureless beings from Dante's Inferno. If they returned to the underworld without delivering their message, maybe death would release my son. I stumbled back inside. They followed me. I regret to inform you, the chaplain continued. From that moment on, I began a journey Euripides described well when he said, "What greater grief can there be for mortals than to see their children dead?" Jason's death was complicated by the fact that he had been killed in an ambush that would become one of the most controversial battles of the Afghan war, the Battle of Wanat. Within days of the battle, newspaper articles across America were exposing the details. In the most dangerous, Taliban-infested valley in Afghanistan, Army commanders had sent 32 paratroopers and 12 Marines to establish a new combat outpost. The village of Wanat was at the bowl of a vast and remote range of mountains. Intelligence officers objected to the mission, arguing that there was indisputable evidence that over 200 Taliban were waiting to attack the men once they arrived. However, the brigadier commander overrode the objections and sent them anyway. The men of the 173rd Airborne Chosen Company understood their fate. The day before they left, many of them called home to say goodbye. Some confessed to their loved ones that they were headed into a bloodbath. Once the men arrived at Wanat, they tried to establish what defenses they could. However, they were short of water, food, supplies. They had to dig in the hard pan soil with their hands to fill the sandbags they used for their only cover. The Afghan construction company hired to help them realize the situation and refused to enter the valley. The village emptied of women and children. The Afghan National Police were openly hostile. The elders warned the soldiers an attack was imminent. The men called their desperate situation back to the army base. There was no response. Then 3 days into their arrival, the army inexplicably withdrew surveillance support. The next morning, on July 13th at 4:20 a.m., the Taliban attacked. When the battle was over, 9 soldiers were dead and 27 wounded, a 75% casualty rate. 8 of the 9 soldiers killed that morning died defending an observation post above the main defensive position. The insurgents knew if they could overrun the OP, they could swoop into the main base and kill every American soldier. 9 paratroopers fought from the OP. They fought like warriors to hold this vital ground. In doing so, they ultimately saved the lives of the rest of the platoon. Jason was stationed at the outpost. Months after his death, his best friend, who had been stationed there with him, flew to Seattle to tell me of my son's last moments. Chris said that when the bombs began that morning, the noise was so loud you could not hear yourself scream. He said if you could imagine hundreds of RPGs, missiles, and bullets hitting an area the size of your living room all at the same time. He said Jason stood up in the midst of the fire with bullets whizzing around him and shot his machine gun into the onslaught until until the barrel melted from heat. He stopped only twice to put tourniquets on his fellow soldiers, saving their lives. It was only 30 minutes into the battle when, in Chris's words, everyone but Jason, for some miraculous reason, was shot to shit. The rest of us were either incapacitated with wounds or out of ammunition. I hollered at Jason to hunker down and not be a hero, but of course he didn't listen. Somewhere he found an M249 saw. It's a portable machine gun. It's heavy, but you can carry it. Jason jumped from the bunker and made his way towards the village, mowing down the snipers that were picking us off. Suddenly there was a moment of silence. We were completely out of ammunition. I pushed the rear wall of the sandbags over, and several of us who were severely wounded rolled down the terraces to the main base. They were the men who survived. Chris hesitated. Jason opened the way for us. I looked at Chris's hands, those of a toughened Army Ranger, and they were shaking. I wondered if those of us at home really understood the sacrifice these men and women make for this country and why so many of them come home with PTSD. Eventually, the uproar over the details of the battle held repercussions for the Army. In September 2009, Senator Jim Webb of Virginia and Patty Murray of Washington State demanded an independent Department of Defense inquiry into the battle. In October 2009, General David Petraeus initiated a formal DoD investigation led by Marine Corps General Richard Natonsky. Natonsky, a decorated four-star general with first-hand fighting experience in Iraq, was now commander of the U.S. Marine Corps forces. For 4 months, he and his team of 30 investigators conducted hundreds of interviews and reviewed stacks of briefings and intelligence reports. In January of 2010, Natonsky delivered his findings. He charged the brigadier commander and 2 other commanding officers with dereliction of duty. General Petraeus reviewed and endorsed the findings. The DoD forwarded Natonsky's conclusions to the Department of the Army. However, under U.S. law, the Army was free to follow or overturn the recommendations. It immediately appointed Army General Charles Campbell to review the case. Campbell had never seen active battle himself and had served much of his enlistment as a stateside tactics instructor. He was retiring in 1 month. In June of 2010, the U.S. Army flew the families to Fort Benning, Georgia, where Natonsky and Campbell would deliver their findings to us before presenting them to the Congress. Natonsky stepped up to the front. His eyes were clear and intensely piercing. He looked like the kind of commander you'd want leading you into battle, tough as buffalo hide, but smart and fair. He explained the process in which he and his team came to their conclusions. But before he read them, his voice changed to that of a father, and he said, "I would never have sent my men into this place." He read his indictment of the commanders and then dismissed himself to catch a plane for D.C. Campbell staggered up front, a pallid-faced man with an undisciplined physique. I was stunned at the contrast in the 2 soldiers. Campbell had cold, dead eyes. There was something deep and disturbing about his smirk, arrogance, meanness. "This is going to be a very bad day for you all," he said, with a hint of derision in his voice. He told us he was reversing the Department of Defense's findings. He cited that such a ruling would have a chilling effect on U.S. ground operations. I came home furious. I felt not only sickened by the Army's refusal to be accountable, but by our system that didn't seem to have any way to hold the military accountable, even to the DoD, Senate, or the American people. Then one day, as I sat in my garden ruminating over the Army's list of offenses, I suddenly realized that all of my anger could never bring Jason back. Nursing my bitterness could do nothing to change the course of fate. As the Persian astronomer Omar Khayyam wrote 1,000 years ago, "The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Not all your piety or wit can lure it back to cancel half a line. Not all your tears wash out a word of it." History was unalterable, but my life was not. I needed to stop making the past responsible for the amount of happiness I could experience today. And if I had a limited number of days on this earth, it was a grave indulgence to squander one moment. If I had been given life, it was my privilege, even my duty, to find the beauty in it. I thought of my son making his conscious choice that day to give his life for his buddies. It was my job to face whatever years I had left with the same bravery Jason had. He had become the teacher, and I the pupil.
You always, you never. All of us have heard that tossed at us at a conversation with a loved one. And these kind of words are often just, the tip of an iceberg that really isn't necessarily revealing itself at the moment of what's really beneath the surface. But boy, can they deep freeze a relationship. And so what I want to talk about tonight is how words that come out of our mouths can really cause some that really reveal those unresolved issues and that those unforgiven acts. And I think it's really important to listen to ourselves. And when we have those kind of broad stroke words of accusation come out of your own mouth, be courageous to go below the surface and kind of see how deep that iceberg goes of hurt. And then think about whether or not you want to make a choice to forgive. And what I wrote about in my article, and I want to talk through tonight, is what I think are 4 common misconceptions about forgiveness that often keep people from actually proceeding to do that act. And the first one is that forgiveness is bilateral. And that's not true. Often it's unilateral, and the other person may never know that you needed to forgive them. Many of you here, unfortunately, may have grudges against your parents, and based upon the age of you all, I'm assuming that your parents may have passed away. And so it's important to recognize that you can forgive somebody, and that person does not need to be alive and does not need to be aware. And the other reason that they may not be aware is that oftentimes you may have a grudge against somebody that they're still living their life, and you're the one who's really hurting. And you're also the one that's only affected by the fact that you've chosen not to forgive. I love a quote from Lewis Smedes. He says it so eloquently: "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you." The second misconception is that somehow granting forgiveness means that you're saying that whatever this person has done to harm you was okay. And I don't think we need to trick our brain or our emotions into somehow saying that somebody did to willfully harm us is somehow okay. Then we wouldn't need to forgive them. Now, we all have people in our lives who drive us nuts. And I've had to deal with the fact that, okay, that's just an annoying habit. There's really nothing there that's this person's willfully trying to do to harm me. But when that has happened, I found it really helpful to, instead of just focusing on how I feel about it, but to really think, what exactly has this person done that is hurting me? What have they done or maybe not done, right? What have they said or not said that is making me feel so hurt? And once I've found that I can identify what exactly it is that somebody has done to harm me, and I can then choose to forgive it, I find that really helps me to get rid of that hurt. An example of when this may be applicable related to finances is that often through my career I've found that couples come in and somewhere along the way, in the last 30 or 40 years of their life, one of the spouses made a choice against the objection of the other one to invest in an investment that went south. And it seemed like it was the gas and oil partnerships back in the 1980s were the most common thing back when I first started at Cornerstone. And often I found that the spouse thinks that what she needs to forgive is that the investment went south. Well, unless the husband really had something to do with it, it was probably unrelated to his decision, but it's a fact that the spouse felt disrespected by the fact that despite her objections, the husband still went ahead. And so for ladies out there who may be nodding your head, or at least internally nodding your head, I'd really encourage you to take this time to release your husband from the I told you so's prison, and I think you'll find you'll unlock the door for yourself as well. I think the third common misconception about forgiveness is that it involves forgetting. I mean, raise your hand if your mom said forgive and forget. I think unless your brain is a computer and you can just push a button and reboot it, I think it's pretty impossible to forget things. And what I've found is that through the process of forgiveness, I know that when I have truly forgiven somebody, if I just really no longer have heat about it. So I can remember the situation, I can remember what somebody said, but I can just kind of remember it as part of my history without getting all, again, hot and bothered. Now, one thing I've noticed in my career is that no one forgets when money has been borrowed and has not been given back. And I don't know, it sounds like there's some laughter. That's definitely an elephant in the room at the holidays. And what I would recommend as a financial advisor is that if you have those situations with your kids, is call it a gift. The IRS allows you to give $13,000 per year to any one individual. And if you're a husband and wife, you could give your kid $26,000. Well, you can also forgive $13,000 per year per person. And if you have a situation out there, trust me, your child has not forgotten that they owe you money. And it's just, again, that elephant in the room. And so you could write your child a note and say, I've forgiven this. And then if that child got more money than any of your other kids will remember this. And so if you can afford it, make it square. And if you can't afford it or you choose not to afford it right now, I really recommend calling your lawyer, amending your will, and just putting a little line in there that that child will get that much less than the rest of the siblings. It's because I think doing this kind of accounting is going to do more than to help your relationships than anything I can recommend tonight. I think the final thing is that forgiveness does not need to require reconciliation. Again, it may be that the person has passed away and you can't be reconciled with them. But forgiveness releases the debt that person owes you, and again, also releases the power that they have over you. I rephrased Lewis Smead's quote from earlier that you are allowing the person you don't forgive to keep you locked in your prison of unforgiveness. And I'm going to close with two recommendations that I also want to bring up is, again, money issues are just something that money and the need for forgiveness go hand in hand. And I sit in meetings oftentimes with the siblings, with the children after the second parent has died. And that's when the gloves come off and the kids start saying, Mom always, Dad never. And all those hurts that you think you raise your children completely fairly and equally, and there's nothing that any of them would have to say to one another, it's all going to come out. And I would really recommend that if you have the time and the courage to call each of your kids and say, what have I done financially during your life that you're going to say was not fair? You may have to bite your tongue when they tell you something because it's going to be their point of view. You may not agree with it, but hear them out. And if there was, again, well, you gave Johnny $10,000 so he could go to college and you never paid for mine, you may have to say, is it a check that you need? And they may say, no, I just need to know why you did that. The other recommendation is that, and I just heard this the other day, and I think it's a great idea, is to have your will, hopefully you all have wills, is be videotaped talking about your will and the choices that you made in your will so that your kids don't have to assume or guess why you named Johnny as the executor instead of Julie. And it may be something like Julie lives in California and Johnny lives in Seattle, but Julie's going to be bitter. She's going to think that you trusted Johnny more, you loved him more, you didn't trust her. So any of those things that you think are rational and fair, I really recommend that you explain in a videotape, or if you don't feel comfortable, you can videotape, just tape yourself your voices. But I really strongly encourage you to think about doing that because you'll allow your children then to have less grudges against you and have strong relationships with each other after you pass. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I enjoyed both of those talks in different ways. So my name is Sandy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about eldering. And eldering is a verb that involves some work. To become elder is not just what you get from becoming older, but it's from doing what I like to talk about as the work of aging. And forgiveness is one of the main pieces of the work of aging. And someone like Carlene, who has done such an amazing work, would you call it work? I mean, such an amazing work to process her story is one of the archetypes of aging, and it's called the wounded healer. So, really thinking about, how, going through that process and, taking what you've learned, just by doing that, you're showing by the way you live your life a way forward. So one of the highest things to attain in elderhood is the ability to walk in someone else's shoes. That the Native American, walk a mile in someone else's moccasins is really a way for us to understand someone else. And this kind of understanding of someone else is what can lead to forgiveness too. It can pave a way for forgiveness because we can see what that person must feel like and what it must be like. So, it seems like if we would walk a mile in other people's moccasins, we wouldn't need to forgive because we would have such a big understanding. But somehow living in this world provides endless opportunities to be upset and angry. So my thesis statement is that the ability to forgive is essential for our own peace of mind. And it's essential for our own personal freedom. And it's essential to live a full and enriching life. So forgiveness is not an easy task. Even a small forgiveness is not an easy task. So it's important for us to understand why it's beneficial to us to forgive. And I think Sue pointed out a lot of the main reasons why it's important for us. But I think if you wanted to summarize it, it's because if I don't forgive, I'm the one who's suffering. They might have done some things that are really wrong or really unjust or really awful, but I'm the one that's suffering. I might be angry, I might feel justified in my anger, and I might repeat over and over in my mind what awful thing somebody else did to me that hurt me, so that I get to relive that suffering every time. So I think that's, we have to let it settle into us that it's in our benefit to forgive. In the same way, or the other side of that coin, one could say that if I spend my time being angry, if I spend my time, thinking about revenge, that's filling up my mind. That's where my mind is. It's thinking about negative things. It's thinking about things that are not helpful to me. So, we know that as we age, we have less available energy. And part of the wisdom of aging is to spend that energy exactly the way we want to. And so, my premise here is that I don't want to spend my energy with the high cost of being angry and the high cost, to my health and the high cost to my, the high energy cost. So I don't want all my space, all my mental space to be taken up with hatred. That's why. That's why we need to forgive, because otherwise we're not free. We're not free to live fully. We're not free to live in the present. We're not free to experience our own joy and our own love and our own creativity. It just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem fair, but that's the way it is. Dr. Robert Enright, I think, has a wonderful, he's a researcher in forgiveness, and this is his definition of forgiveness. And he will not like to be tied to it. He feels the free to change his mind because it's a complicated subject. But this is one definition of forgiveness. It's giving up resentment to which you are entitled and offering to the person or persons who hurt you friendlier attitudes to which they are not entitled. Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi is a visionary in the field of aging. And if you get a chance, I highly recommend a beautiful book. It's called From Aging to Saging. From Aging to Saging. And he talks about this concept of mental housekeeping. Just in the same way that we sweep our kitchen floor, we also need to sweep our mind and keep it clear so that we are free to do the creative pursuits that we would like to do, and so that anger doesn't build up. So this might be something like a forgiveness practice, where we think of the small irritants. You know, life is full of small irritants and big irritants. And, you know, forgiveness happens little by little. But if you think about the small irritants as a practice at the end of the day, you know, somebody came late to dinner, somebody talks too loud, somebody talks too much, somebody didn't talk enough, you know, somebody built their fence too close to my garage, you know, whatever it is, the children are too noisy. If you think about those little things at the end of the day before they build up to a whole lot of negative energy, and try to release them. Whatever technique you might use, it could be deep breathing, journaling, naming it, some of the things that Sue said, all these kinds of things. Meditation, prayer, deep thinking. Another idea that Dr. Robert Enright speaks about is this concept of a forgiveness consciousness, and I love that idea, to think about a forgiveness consciousness. And that, I like to think of it as having a big available store of forgiveness powder. So when anything comes my way, I can just sprinkle a little forgiveness powder on something and the anger will go away. But I think what it is, it's something that comes, you know, we have all the stresses in the world, global stresses and personal stresses. And if one develops through practice this kind of forgiveness consciousness where things can be let go, and where if through our developing a mature understanding of human behavior, including our own behavior, that we can develop compassion and insight. So in this way, I think we can all aspire to have peace of mind, freedom from hatred and suffering, and the ability to live life fully and vitally in the present. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Tom Orton, and thank you so much for having us here. It's just a beautiful facility, and we're just very pleased to be with you tonight. The first thing you have to know about me is that I have Parkinson's disease, and I'm a little concerned that you, on a practical level, that you might not be able to understand me. I slur my words sometimes, and I sometimes drop my voice quite low, so have no hesitancy about raising your hand if you can't hear. I'm also going to talk about PD tonight because it owns a corner of the subject that we're talking about tonight, which is forgiveness, and my corner of that is forgiving yourself. When I was first diagnosed 3.5 years ago, I was obsessed with pinning the blame on somebody or something for this disease. Things like this just didn't happen for no reason. So it boiled down to either God or me, which you can imagine, you know, there's no contest there really. I couldn't blame God because I wanted to hit somebody with a baseball bat, you know, and God is kind of a bad candidate for that. And it sure as hell couldn't be my fault, because what did I do to deserve such a thing, such a terrible thing? Well, if there's nobody to blame, who do you forgive? One important thing that has happened to me in the last 3 years is that I've stopped thinking of Parkinson's disease as a terrible thing. You can't live your life dragging around a terrible thing from dawn to dusk. You know, it'll drive you crazy. Plus, the law of averages is against you. You know, one day you'll wake up and accidentally forget about that you have Parkinson's disease, and you'll laugh and have a good day, and then you'll think, I can't laugh, I've got Parkinson's disease, God damn it, this is serious stuff, you know? Parkinson's happens. It's like aging, it's like anything else. You can't point a finger at anybody, and you have to accept a certain amount of, that it's just something that's out of your control. It's difficult and it's frightening sometimes. It's difficult to deal with. It won't let you forget that you've got it sometimes. It is constantly pestering you with examples of your own inadequacies, your own growing, how do I say it here? I said it brilliantly here, your own growing incapacities. I used to be able to chop garlic like Jacques Pepin, and I can't do that anymore without risking fingers and limbs and everything like that. You know, and folding the laundry, something stupid like that takes forever, you know? Parkinson's is a lot like aging, but like at 10 times the normal speed. You have to admit that it is a perfect entity in its own kind of relentless way, like aging is. And like aging, it brings unexpected gifts. This was a big surprise to me. My brother Patrick took me out to dinner one evening, and he reminded me of something I'd said early on when it was first diagnosed. I told him, my life is shit. And pardon me for using that language, but that's what it was. That's the most descriptive word of what I was feeling at the time. And at this dinner, Patrick said, you don't still feel that way, do you, Tom? And I said, no. And I realized that somehow or another, I liked my life better than I ever had. I appreciated it more. I loved my life, which surprises me still. I hope that lasts. I hope that part lasts. I'm going to switch gears. I'm a fiction writer. I love writing novels, and I'm going to switch gears and talk a little about that. One of the best things, I'm talking about forgiveness in fiction. One of the best things about forgiveness is that most of the time it's grudged. We don't like to, us men particularly, we don't like to forgive. It becomes very difficult for us. And you think of the great fictional stories in our culture, Moby Dick, for instance, King Lear. These would be turned to farce if there were forgiveness, if these were forgiving souls in these books, if they were generous people, which they're not, if they were sane, which they're not. They'd all be very short books, and no publisher would touch them. I'm going to kind of switch gears again here, too. Captain Ahab is an obsessive figure, as is King Lear. A lot of the people that were interested most in fictional lives, in movies, are obsessive people. And it bothers me that our culture, our country has sort of taken on this obsession, this obsessiveness. And I think it goes back to 9/11 and the 10-year look for Osama bin Laden, which was never very satisfying, gave us kind of a bloodlust. I don't know if you remember Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, getting up in front of one of the debates, and the moderator asking him about the 200-plus people whose execution he oversaw. And before Rick Perry could answer, the audience burst into thunderous applause. They loved the fact that capital punishment was being handed down in a supposedly sane society. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's healthy for our president to be admitting that he killed someone. What are his children going to think of him? What are we going to think of him? What are our children going to think of him? I'm not sure that justice is anything but it's a very suspect entity, I think. You see that bumper sticker that says justice on it. Who's justice? Who are we talking about here? Are we talking about eye for an eye, hand for hand? We're talking about the kind of justice we have in this country? I'm not sure the human heart can distinguish between justice and revenge. I think every kind of, even capital punishment, is a sort of revenge. As necessary as it might be, it's a kind of revenge. Forgiveness, I don't know what part that plays. I think forgiveness has to have some kind of room has to be made for it in this culture more than has been the case. So, how do I deal with the inequities and the cruelties I feel have been my lot without my asking for them? And I found out by writing this and by showing it to Max and to our editor that I didn't have a very firm grip on it at all. I can illustrate this with a little story. Not long ago, I got a packet from my insurance company that was designed to help Parkinson's people live better lives. And in this packet was a little wallet-sized card. One side of the card you wrote your meds down on, which is a good idea. The other side of the card had 2 sentences on it. Those 2 sentences were, "I have Parkinson's disease. I am not intoxicated." And I laughed, and it's absurd, but 2 people so far have thought I was drunk. You know, I shuffle around depending on where I'm on my med cycle, and sometimes I slur my words like I'm doing now. And, you know, why they have to say something to you, I don't know, but, you know, it's natural enough that they would think that you're intoxicated. So these kinds of things, you know, they're not crucial, they're not huge, but they mount up in you. And the small humiliations that you acquire with any kind of disease, or just by growing older, if you let them grow inside you and fester without adding something to balance them out, you're going to be in trouble. Well, as I say, I didn't deal too well with my dealing with these inadequacies at first. I wrote to my insurance company and I said, I offered kindly, with tongue-in-cheek, to rewrite their card for them. And here's what I wrote. The card now said, "I have Parkinson's disease. I am not intoxicated. Unless this is a bar and I've been drinking Mai Tais for 6 hours and hitting on all the female patrons." And again, here's where Max and our editor, Carol, came in. They said, "How satisfying is mocking yourself?" And I said, well, it works to a degree. It works a little bit. But they were right. It doesn't really work in the long run. What you need for the long run is something more substantial than that. You need something that will help you forgive yourself for your long range, forgive yourself long range for succumbing to depression, for hating your body for not doing what you want it to, and for any number of things that are just increasing all the time. Forgiving yourself, and this type of forgiveness is the kind that results in true, soul-satisfying peace. Hard to come by, but you can do it. For me, it comes from packing your life with meaning. Life has no meaning unless you give it meaning. And there's no meaningful life for me without 2 things. Writing is one, and the other is opening my heart to the people that know me best, and drawing them close and keeping them close and loving them as hard and as long as I can. Thank you very much.
To start the questions, I do have one for you, Carlene. Are there times when we shouldn't forgive? I mean, is there a time when you feel like you need to get justice first before you can forgive?
Well, I think that you can forgive. I think there's a place to seek justice after Jason was killed, and the group of boys were killed. The parents, created and pushed a campaign to try to get the Army to be accountable, and that's what led to the Department of Defense investigation. So I think you can do that sort of thing, push towards justice, but I don't think you can tie yourself to the results of that. It's either going to go one way or another, and you have to separate your forgiveness from the results of an investigation like that, because you can never control that. It might turn out that the Army changes. It might turn out that they don't. So I think you can try to seek justice, but also forgive in spite of what happens.
Do you really believe that forgiveness is necessary and possible in all situations?
I think I would answer that by saying, how much do you want to get yourself out of the prison of that lack of forgiveness? So certainly, I remember Jesus was asked by one of his disciples, how many times do I need to forgive somebody? And he threw out the number, 7, because that was the perfect number. And, he said, no, 70 times 7. And I've had people that I've had to forgive at least 70 times, 7 times. And because I realize I still have that heat when I think about the situation. So from that standpoint, maybe sometimes you don't ever completely forgive someone, in the sense that you're still processing the fact that you still have some heartburn over it, or high blood pressure, or angst. But I think it is necessary for your own personal health to at least try to forgive people.
Thank you. Sandy, I'm actually interested about this. How can you forgive when disease or dementia is involved?
Disease and dementia are different things in a way, depending on what it is. But I'm a physical therapist by trade, and so I've always liked the idea. Excuse me. I've liked the idea that when people are in crisis, or that they're not so much interested in the superficial. So they're more readily will go to the deeper and more important things, and are more readily available to forgive. Wendy Lusbader is a pretty well-known social worker in the area. She's just written a book called Life Gets Better, also a wonderful book. And she wrote a little blurb on the frail elder, where there was an example of a physical therapist was teaching how to transfer, teaching the son how to transfer his father from one place to another place. And it involved getting very close and having kind of a bear hug. And what happened was, when the son tried this with his father, they embraced in this bear hug, and they both started crying. And it was the first time they had hugged in a long time. So that's the kind of thing. Dementia is a little bit different, because the cognitive abilities aren't there. It's not so much a mental process, but I work with people with dementia every day. And what I have come to understand is that when the mental processes are less, the heart processes are more. And so there's more love, and there's more availability to come from the joy, from the heart level. It requires a different way of working. But forgiveness, as Sue mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to be reciprocal, and it can happen even as we're on the Ds. We have dementia, we have disease, and we have death also can be, a one-sided process.
Thank you. Tom, are readers of fiction more or less likely to forgive fictional characters? I'm interested. Is that?
Well, I have a little story I can tell about that. When my novel came out, I was going to a lot of book clubs, and I went to this one book club, and this woman said, I hate your novel. She says, I threw it across the room after chapter 2. I hate it. And I said, well, can you give me a reason why? And she says, well, your main character, he goes behind his woman friend's back. He lies to her. He goes to San Francisco without telling her, and then he's going behind her back, and I hate that. So I don't know, cynical or whatever, and perverse. I brought the conversation around to Hannibal Lecter, who is the star of a terrible person, just a complete, he flays people and eats their innards sauteed with Chianti, a fine Chianti wine. And I said, what do you think about Hannibal Lecter? And this one said, oh, I love those books. They're terrific. I just love them. I eat them up, man. So I asked kind of politely as I could, well, don't you think you cut Hannibal quite a lot of slack? Don't you think it could be a little easier on my guy, And she said, she got kind of upset, and she said, well, you guys know Hannibal Lecter. And I guess by that she meant that, we invest something in people that are characters that are more real, more recognizably like people we know. We invest more in them than we do in Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter is a very engaging person, in quotes person, but he's not somebody that you assign the typical things like betrayal. And could you accuse him of a betrayal? What he does is so much worse that, and I think he's such a larger-than-life character, and I think that's why she liked him better.
Thank you.
Well, I just have a question. I wonder, how can forgiveness lead to reconciliation, if that's possible?
I think it can lead to reconciliation, but just that term reconciliation requires two people. And so I think from that standpoint, I think in one of the articles, the woman had said that she was sorry to her sister, and her sister hasn't yet decided whether she's going to accept her apology. And so, but at the same time, if all we can do at the end of the day is control our own decisions and make our own choices, certainly there's never going to be reconciliation if I don't start. And so that's what I found, is that I have to be the one that's willing to kind of bend the knee and come and say, I'm sorry, even if they don't deserve it.
I think, like justice, I think reconciliation or forgiveness is always kind of lopsided, and you have to be, there's always one person who's not going to be forgiving enough, and there's always other people in a family situation who are going to be too forgiving. And the ones who are too forgiving look like losers. Who knows? They look like peacemakers to me. And they look like the kind of people who keep families together.
I'd like to, Sandy, about consciousness, forgiveness consciousness. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think forgiveness consciousness is a way of being. That's how I look at it. Having a forgiveness consciousness comes from practicing forgiveness and from working at it, so it sort of rises up to the top of our availability. It's available more readily, so it's just more automatic. It's something not buried so deep in us that it's in our consciousness that this can happen, and it can happen quickly. It's kind of a way of being that has come from maturity and understanding, human development and growth and development. And as far as making you weak, no. It might look, like you were saying, it might make you look weak, but it really takes that strength and that inner poise and, to turn the other cheek, or to have that inner strength and to bend the knee, or whatever it takes. It's really the strength.
Thank you. Carlene, does forgiveness or lack of it really affect our health?
there are quite a few studies out there now. The Mayo Clinic has done some extensive studies that point to the fact that when we forgive, our heart rates go down, our blood pressure goes down. But the thing that I was most impressed about was that our immune system is strengthened. And I think as we grow older, to me, that's sort of the key to health, is a really healthy immune system. And you can understand why anger and bitterness would make your immune system vulnerable. And so, yeah, there are quite a few other studies. I actually printed off if I can get to them, but just University of Michigan is doing quite a bit. But yeah, some of the things they say forgiveness. University. Well, this is Mayo Clinic. They found people had healthier relationships, greater spiritual and psychological well-being, less anxiety, lower blood pressure, fewer symptoms of depression, and lower alcohol and substance abuse. So that was just out of the Mayo Clinic, and then I think it was the University of Michigan that did a lot on the immune system. So, yeah, lower blood pressure. I think it's a real indication that maybe we better forgive people if we want to be healthy as we grow older.
Can any of you give a scenario that you've been involved in where you've actually seen this process work, and have they come to the meeting with notes, or is there a process by which makes it that you can come to an actual forgiveness meeting with some kind of background, I guess, if you will,
between two people,
Mm-hmm.
where you come in, negotiate. Well, I tried it with the United States Army, and it didn't go real well, so.
These are not huge experiences, but I can share two things, two people that I needed to work on forgiveness with. And one was with somebody that I did not want to reconcile with, and I did not want to, carry on a further relationship. But so I kind of did my own process of forgiveness. The other one was someone where I felt I'd made a mistake, and I did want to continue that relationship. And so I, tended first. I sent a little card, and then I made an email, and then a phone call. It was sort of like that. And then we went for a walk, and I apologized, and and it's still a process. We've gotten together a few times, and those kind of things. And it's not the same as it was before, but I appreciate that it's, there's a connection.
Well, I'll tell you, I've been really moved. Carlene, I listened to your story, and I think I've got 4 sons, and I can't even imagine even being able to forgive or get past probably getting out of my bed. I don't know, and I know that some of our folks here have lost children, and, that's devastating. And, so I just admire. I don't know how you can forgive and move on.
This thing that Jason would want me to, that I had raised him to be a really adventurous, loving spirit. And he was a great guy. And I realized one morning, I was laying in bed, and I was thinking, I don't want to get out of bed. And it was almost like I could hear him say, "Mom, get your butt out of bed, come on, this isn't you." And so I think about him. I think about what he would want to see. And I think he does see what, on some level, what's going on here. And so I try to live with the same bravery he did, and honor. But it is tough. It was tough at first especially. But I think we have to live to make them proud then, or to, so.
So I'm going to go home, and I'm going to write a gift thing for my children and I'm going to forgive them for not paying me back. No. I so get that, but that's a great idea. So, yeah, I'm definitely going to work on that. Yeah. Sandy, I appreciate what you've shared. And, you know, the dementia part, I've got a parent who's has that. And so I'm sitting right in the middle of it. And that part really spoke to me. And Tom, I just so, you know, have gotten so much out of what you've shared, and I appreciate you sharing it, and I know many here can identify with that too, and how it means to forgive, you know, something that's happened like that to you, and to be able to go on and really live life with meaning and fullness. I mean, it's amazing. So, thank you. Okay, Max Wise. It's not that. It's Maxwell's. See? It's the wise Maxwell's. Thank you so much. And Carol's the managing editor, I believe. And she came and is a part of this as well. And actually, she's from Michigan. And so I think she brought us the warm weather. And we're really grateful. So thank you. I want to thank them. I mean, I think the magazine really speaks to who we are and what we are, and I hope that everyone reads the articles and enjoys them. We're looking forward to the next issue, and we appreciate all the authors that are here with us tonight. And I know I sometimes try and write, and it's terrible, and it really is a gift that you have. And so thank you for sharing.